the event happened in the Strickland State Forest.
Yeah, down in Somersby.
I'll talk to you a bit later about that, but interestingly, we got a message from someone else about a month and a half ago from Strickland as well.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I know after it happened, the friend that I was with, she linked me to a story somewhere similar to the area, and I've tried to find it again since, but I can't find it. But someone else saw one, and the description they gave I found was eerily similar to what we saw, which just makes it even creepier. But so I was surprised because I didn't think there'd be any sort of in that area. It's such like a little area that's got a lot of people, so that's sort of why we went hiking there, because I thought, oh no, this is nice and safe, and lo and behold.
Okay, and what actually took you down to Strickland?
So it was my friend's birthday, and I asked her what she wanted to do, and she wanted to go for a hike. So she sort of had heard of the area and looked nice enough, so we were just sort of going out for a day hike.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, look, just take me through the encounter from start to the end and, you know, what you saw, what you experienced.
It was pretty early in the day. I know at about the time that we actually had the sighting, I remember after we got back to the car, I looked at my phone, it was about that 2:30 mark. So when we started, it was probably about somewhere around 12:30 in the day. So we pulled up at the car park. It wasn't that far off the highway. And there was a fair few people around, which made me feel pretty comfortable. There was lots of families, lots of people out hiking, pretty nice Sunday afternoon. And you sort of go down to get onto the bottom trail, because there's two trails that we were looking at doing, and we decided to do the one that's sort of at the base of, it's not really a mountain, but it's sort of the base of a ridgeline, I guess. And it's quite deep into sort of almost a jungly area. There's heaps of palm trees and groves. It's really, really thick, and you've got to cross a little creek to sort of get into it that you can't get into by any vehicles. And it was about probably 10, 15 minutes into the walk that we came across this section of like dense palms that had just been completely flattened. All the trees were squashed, everything was broken down. And my friend at the time made the comment that it looked like something had sort of had a giant tantrum in the area. Everything was just squashed, which I found really odd because I knew that you couldn't get in here via vehicles. So we sort of, what does that? No idea. So we kept going. And the path goes deep along next to a stream for most of the walk. It sort of does a big loop. And when we got to sort of the end of the loop, the furthest point before you have to turn around to come back, it comes out to a sort of clearing where on one side of us there's fencing that looks like it's sort of pine groves, which I'm guessing was for logging or something. And it was a little bit of a clear-cut opening, and then you sort of hook a right back into the forest. And before we took that turn, a large branch fell. It was clear day. There was no wind. There was no birds. There was nothing that really indicated why this branch fell. And we sort of caught a glimpse of it as it had, after it started to fall, and it just seemed like it was quite strange. It wasn't a whole limb of a branch. It's almost like a broken off large bit of a branch that had been snapped on both sides, which was also quite eerie. So we thought, okay, something's a bit strange. We didn't feel comfortable in the area, so we thought we'd hike back. Sort of didn't go too fast, didn't go too slow, just wanted to get back to the end of the trail, which the total trail took about an hour. So we're pretty deep in there. So when we finally got back to the end of the trail, we decided we didn't want to cut the day short, and there was another hike directly above that trail at the top of a ridgeline. So we got in the car, drove up to the top car park and hopped out again to do the next bit of the walk. So again, it was probably again about that 10, 15 minutes into the hike that we came across a large tree that I don't know the species of tree. It had rather rough bark, but the tree had been completely stripped of all the bark, which we found really, really, really bizarre. And it wasn't sort of like goannas or birds or anything scratching at it. It was like the bark had been stripped and peeled like a banana, which it probably started about 8 foot up all the way to the base of the tree, which again, we sort of both looked at each other and went, what the hell does that? It's too tall for humans. Just found it perplexing, found it a little unsettling. so didn't think too much of it because, again, it's a populated area, but on this top trail there wasn't that many people. So we decided to keep going, as you do. We were walking along the very top of a ridgeline, and it sort of comes to a really narrow path where on the right-hand side when you're walking along the ridge, it's probably about 15, 20 metres. I'm not that good with gauging distance, but probably about 20 metres, and then you come to the edge of sort of almost a bit of a cliff. Whereas on the left-hand side, it's like a steep bank that's just really high bracken, that's all clear-cut bracken down to the forest line, which is probably about, I'd want to say about 30 metres. So we're going along, we're on this little trail, and we come between these two massive boulders that were absolutely huge that we had to squeeze through. And then when we popped out the other side, probably took us again, once we got to the other side where the incident happened, it was probably another good little 5-10 minute walk from those boulders. But as we got to that point past them, it was sort of like the trail would keep going down and it'd start getting deep back into the bush. And this area where we stopped was where that branch fell from the tree. So I was in the lead, she was behind me. There wasn't really any space for us to be walking side by side. And I just got this really, really, really horrible feeling in my stomach that just something wasn't right. It felt just really uncomfortable. So I turned around to tell her that, I don't know why, but we need to go back home. And as I've turned to face her, looking on now my right-hand side down where the bracken is, just before the tree line, there's this thing. And I can see from sort of its shoulders up and its head, it's just outside the tree line. So I'm guessing that it would have had to have been probably on its belly to be pretty close to the ground. And I feel like, as it does, time stood still. I got a really clear look at it. It had a completely blank expression on its face. There was no emotion on it. It had really dark charcoal skin, really deep-set dark eyes. I couldn't see any whites to the eyes. Really broad shoulders. The shoulders, when I got home, I tried to sort of guesstimate. It would have been about probably 3 foot across. So really, really, really broad shoulders compared to a human. There was no real neck. The head was strange. It was sort of like, it was conical, but it wasn't really big and conical. It was almost like a smaller scalp in the back, but it had a little bit of a peak to it. And then it had dark hair that looked pretty black, probably about 2 to 3 inches long. So it wasn't really, really long and shaggy like a lot of the ones that you hear, but it was, it was long enough. It was pretty thick fur. But the fur stopped sort of around the forehead area and then came to above the chin but below the bottom lip. So the rest of the face was sort of pretty clear skin. And then the weirdest thing that stood out to me that I really focused on was the nose. It was really, really human, but it was completely flattened against its face, sort of like how you see like boxers that have broken their nose a fair bit. It was really squashed down, but it had hooded nostrils, so it wasn't pushed back like a gorilla. It was really, really, really human. So, probably only looked at it for a few seconds, completely just terrified. And I just remember trying to sort of think, don't stare at it too much, and grabbed my friend, just said to her that we need to go, assuming that she'd seen it, not really saying, oh my God, did you see that? Because, complete panic just sort of took over. I just remember telling her that to hold on to my backpack, to not to run. There was just this thing in my stomach that said, just don't run, just to try and walk as quickly as we could out of the area and get the fuck out of there pretty much. I remember she grabbed a stick and she held on pretty close behind me and we sort of paced our way out there. But as we started moving, it came up and there was another one too that she actually told me later that when I was looking at the one in the bracken, she was looking at this one that was off to its left that was further into the bushes that was standing up. And I wish I'd asked her sort of how tall she would have guesstimated it to be. But as we're moving up and out towards our car, they start paralleling us in the tree line. And as they're paralleling us, they're grabbing trees and they're pulling them back on their weight and letting them go. So you can see the trees moving, which is just freaking us out more because it's confirmation that there is something there. And, you know, a human adult would struggle to sort of be bending these trees as they do. So we're making the way back up the ridgeline and we get back to that boulder area, and she tells me afterwards that she was certain that something was going to reach out and grab me and like drag me off into the bushes, and I'm so glad it didn't. But after that point of the boulders, even though we still were incredibly keen to get back to the car, it seems like after that point that's when they stopped. So I don't know if we sort of left the area or what, but that's sort of when we got out of there.
Very interesting story. You said this was like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that?
Yeah, I remember when I got back to the car seeing the time, and it was about 2:30 in the day.
Would your friend talk to us about her experience as well?
Yeah, I can put you onto her.
Have you ever tried to sketch what it is that you saw, or it seems like you had quite a good look at its face?
I did. I drew a picture after I got back home, but I don't know what's happened to that drawing since.
I mean, it sounds from your description you had a very good view of the face. So I'm just trying to get the position again. So you're on the track and you're saying this creature was in amongst the bracken, just outside the fence line.
Yeah, down the hill from us, just before the tree line, like right on that edge of the tree line. So it had come out just that fraction. You
seem to believe that this thing might have been lying down and then lifted itself up to look at you. Is that kind of the position you're thinking of? Or it was standing it could have been standing or kneeling in the bracken?
I'd say, looking at how big the shoulder seemed across, I'd say it would have had to have been probably on its stomach. But the problem is because it was such a steep incline down, I don't know how tall that bracken was at that point. I've often wanted to go back since to the area to try and take measurements of how tall and how far away things are. But, you know, the other part of me just does not want to go back whatsoever. I mean, the bracken normally grows to about 2 to 3 foot, I'd say. So I don't know if it'd be kneeling. I don't know if it'd be on its stomach. I just know that its shoulders were absolutely massive. So, and then once we're walking and they're further down the trees and standing up, I tried not to really look in that direction. I was so terrified, but they seemed, from the peripheral of what you'd be catching, they were quite tall.
You didn't say anything to your friend at the time about it before you got back to the car?
I just said that we need to go, pretty much. I just full went into shock and just didn't. It's almost like I didn't want to sort of address it, but I could tell the way from her body language that she grabbed me, and she grabbed a stick instantly when I said hold on to my backpack, that she'd seen something too. And then we got back to the car, and that's where we were like, oh my God, did you see that? And we sort of went through each other's stories of what did you see and what did I see. And I didn't want to tell her the description that I saw until I'd sort of heard her story to go, okay, I'm not insane, you know. And when she started describing what she's seeing, it's like, okay, we're both seeing the same things. It was just sheer panic the moment I sort of looked at it of, you know, the thought was, okay, we're going to die. So it was just shut down, let's get out of here. There was sort of no, let's stop and talk about it.
You were looking at her and seeing across her right shoulder this creature that you saw, and you're saying she was looking over your shoulder and seeing something back in that direction.
So it's sort of like, so I'm in front of her on the trail going down. I swung around to face her, and as I've turned around, I turned around on my right side. As I've been mid-turn, I've seen it. And she's standing next to me looking down the hill, but she's not looking at the one I'm looking at. She's looking, her eyes clawed on one that I didn't notice at first. It's further off into the trees to its left.
You appear to have a really good view of its face, but you said the colour was black. Yeah,
the skin was like a charcoal. So the skin wasn't like black and shiny. It was like a charcoal, but its fur seemed really dark black.
When you're looking at the face, did you get the impression of, and you mentioned human-like nose, but are you looking at a kind of ape face or a human face or something else?
It had really human features, but it's almost like mixing a human, specifically an Aboriginal, with a gorilla is the best way I'd describe it.
And the expression didn't change while you're looking at it?
Nothing. There was no change in expression, which I think was even more unsettling because there was no way to sort of gauge what it was thinking. It just had this completely blank stare the whole time while staring at me.
You saw head, face, shoulders, but no arms, nothing else.
No. And it had no real neck. It was sort of like the head's more sort of stuck on the shoulders.
And you said the head seemed, it wasn't a particularly large head. You said it sort of seemed a little bit almost small, in a sense, compared to the shoulders.
Yeah, so it's quite, I don't know how to fully explain it. It's sort of like it had, the face was large, the shoulders are large, the back of the skull, you know how with a human head, you've sort of got a really large back of the cranium that sort of sticks out, whereas it had sort of almost seemed a bit smaller in the back of the head. The face was quite large, but then it had a little bit of a crested, pointy peak to it, but not huge like you see some draw.
You're looking at it pretty much down slope, but face on or slightly side on. What was the viewing position of you to this? It was just directly face on to you, facing right at you?
It was a bit so as I've swung around, it's not directly parallel to me. It's a little bit diagonal behind. So where we've been walking, I guess it was sort of a little bit more behind to us. So I've swung around and seen it, but it's turned its body to be staring directly at me. We heard him moving the trees, but it was less of footsteps and more like the trees being pulled back. It wasn't really, really loud footsteps. I had an encounter probably a year or two before this in the Wattigans, and I got parallel out by something that I never saw, but I assume it's one of these again, and you could hear it distinctly walking like a human, whereas I didn't get that so much with this, but it was more the tree noise. But at the same time too, I think I was in shock a little bit because it was sort of almost like I had a full tunnel vision just trying to get back to the car.
Apart from the Wattingans encounter and this experience, I mean, have you had yourself any other what you'd consider to be kind of unusual experiences? It's a broad question.
I've had 2 Wattigans experiences. So there was a time a few years back, a friend and I were camped on a ridgeline pretty deep in the Wattigans. It was pretty late one night, and when we got at the area, I noticed a bit of a weird smell. It wasn't really, really strong, but there was sort of like almost a weird roadkill smell that just sort of was there and then disappeared. And later that night around the fire, I had a bit of a weird feeling, and I was just looking into the dark, and then suddenly a pebble got thrown directly into my field of view that landed in front of our feet. So that was pretty creepy and weird. My dad has had a few encounters, so he hunts a lot, and he's spoken in the past about having some possible Yowie encounters years and years and years ago, probably before I was born, but that's sort of about it.